Welcome to the tactical preview of Manchester City versus Burnley. In this series, what I try to do is predict City's starting 11. I try to offer some suggestions as to how City should play. We also touch on the opponent, Burnley in this instance, their key strengths, weaknesses, how might we expect them to set up against City, and then how does that inform how City will set up by contrast. Last time out, after previewing the Arsenal game, I got all 11 players right. Not too proud of that because, to be honest, it seemed obvious like Pep was just going to do very minimal rotation. Let's see how close we get this time round. This is City's starting 11 against Huddersfield. This isn't Burnley's most recent starting 11 because they played in the League Cup also against Cardiff. They rotated quite a bit as well, so I've opted to show you what they did against Forest, their most recent Premier League game. And maybe that's where we should start, because even though this is how Burnley set up in the most recent Premier League game, it might be more useful to touch on, well, how did they set up against one of the really uber dominant sides in the Premier League? How did they set up against Liverpool at Turf Moor? And that was a 5-4-1. Some people criticise Burnley for their approach, but they're perfectly well within their rights to defend for their lives against the best team currently in the Premier League, who has the most firepower in the Premier League. And they nearly got that 0-0. It was so close, but a silly error in the 90th minute gave Liverpool a penalty, and from there they were able to obviously win the game. So that immediately tells us that Burnley are not a pushover. They are going to be very challenging to break down. There is no doubt in my mind they're going to play a 4-5-1, maybe even a 5-4-1, maybe even more of like a 5-5. Realistically, how much of an outlet is Foster going to be in the match? They do have some tricky players on the counter-attack. If Foster is able to hold up the ball and be that outlet, waits for the wide players to advance up the pitch, then City will be in a bit of danger. And I would expect Burnley to, as I say, get Foster pinned against one of our centre-backs, hold up the play, and then try to play the reverse balls into the channels, in behind the gaps that our full-backs will leave. That's the only way I can really see Burnley creating chances against City outside of set pieces, and that will be by design. That will be Scott Parker's intent to play like that, and again, they are perfectly well within their right to play like that. You'll notice a familiar face here, Kyle Walker, City legend, in my opinion, best right-back in Premier League history, but it's now 2025. Walker has not been very good at the football for the past couple of seasons. This, for me, should be a huge area that City should be targeting. Now, you could argue that, well, Walker's going to want to prove a point, he's going to be up for it, and absolutely he will be. I'm not trying to disrespect Walker, because again, I think he's the best right-back in Premier League history. The reality is that right now we have a very in-form left winger who loves to take on a fullback like Walker, who really hates to take on fullbacks like Doku. There's no world that Donnarumma doesn't start, so he's going to be starting therein. O'Reilly as well, I think that he's almost definitely guaranteed to start because Aït-Nouri is still out injured, and I just don't see Pep trying to play Guardiola or Ake out there. It doesn't really make too much sense to me. So immediately I'm going to take Ake out and pop Guardiola back in. And I think probably likewise with Stones, this seems to be his go-to partnership so far this season. We know that Burnley are going to set up in a low block. They're going to be incredibly compact in two ways. They're going to be compact vertically, so there's not going to be much space between their two lines, their defensive line and their midfield line. They're also going to be incredibly horizontally compact as well. That means a couple of things, because the question is always, what's the best way to break down a low block? And there are a number of methods. But if you know your opposition are going to play like this, so they're going to be vertically and horizontally compact, how can you use that to your advantage? Well, the key in the first instance is that if you are being horizontally compact, that means that you must be leaving some space out here for your wide players in these sorts of zones here. They're basically going to be forfeited by definition. So it's incredibly important that whoever plays out on the wings for City, that they are able to offer something offensively going forwards. It means that you are probably going to be wanting to start some players who thrive in those pockets of space. So your small space specialists, and that's a lot of S's. And that's why we are going to be, relying on players like Foden, for example. That is his bread and butter. Those are the generals. We can also touch on the fact that you want to be making what I would describe as counterbalancing runs. I'm sure there's a far better term for that, but I can't think of what the term is. Essentially where a player moves backwards. So let's say if Mikasa was playing, so he would move backwards. This would force the centre-back to track him. And then as he's doing that, another player moves forwards. I've no idea what the term is for that. The other thing that is probably worth noting is that if you know your opponent's playing a back five, the best way to get an advantage against a back five is to have 6 attackers, which sounds a bit crazy, but we know that City have played with like a 3-1-6 before in the past, where they literally have 6 attacking players, essentially. You don't really have to worry too much about build-up. You don't really have to worry that much about progressing the ball either, because the opponents are essentially saying, look, we're not even going to try to fight you in phase 1 and phase 2, just see if you can break us down in respect to phase 3. So you can really easily get into that more offensive shape. And yeah, you will be susceptible to a counter-attack, but if you're overpowering your opponents so much and you're pinning them back, it's going to make it so hard for them to counterattack with any real venom or true threat. So what I really want to see from City, and what I'm going to predict, is that we line up with some sort of shape where there are 6 attacking players minimum to outnumber Burnley's defensive numbers and defensive units. Immediately, like, Mikasa is not starting, Haaland's obviously starting. He was rested for the Huddersfield game, wasn't even on the bench. I'd be amazed if Rodri doesn't start. I know it's only Burnley, but he was rested for the Huddersfield game, again, wasn't even on the bench. Same with Guardiola as well. I'm just going to predict Rodri to start. I'm not going to predict Lewis to start. The Savio Bob one is interesting. We will come back to that in a moment. Touching back on the horizontal compactness, what it means you need in your wingers are basically game breakers, low block specialists, and that's exactly what Doku is. He's more than capable of taking on his fullback, certainly a player like Walker as well, and we're also seeing how fantastic he is in these sorts of like central areas, in those pockets as well. He's really demonstrated the start of the season. He's more than capable of doing that with fantastic work against Man United, Napoli, and also Arsenal in some of those smaller spaces. So Doku is a non-negotiable for me. He has to start. He was another player who's absolutely rested for the Huddersfield game. A player who wasn't rested for Huddersfield, but Guardiola in the most recent press conference literally came out and said that Foden asked to start against Huddersfield. He wants to start every single game. He's young. He can keep going and play those games consistently. His recovery is great. He has to start because another weapon that I didn't really touch on, low block breaking tools. Foden is one of those tools, not only because of his ability within the pockets, but maybe even more importantly, because of moments like against Huddersfield, a really stubborn low block team, a moment of magic, an outside the box shot is perfect to break them down, because you are literally, as a defensive side, you are asking for the opponents to take those long shots and to take those risks. I'm actually going to predict him to start, even though I wouldn't start him. Because Reinders is actually a player, he's illustrated, he's a player who's better when he has a lot of space to work with. Now, in fairness, he's going to have a lot of time to work with, and his first touch is very clean. But I might actually, given the degree of defensive work that we're going to experience, I would actually gamble and play a far more adventurous midfield. Like, I would probably go for like a Rodri, Foden, Bob. And that might sound insane, but I think it's probably worth it, because you're not going to be doing much defending, if any defending, in that first half in particular. Okay, maybe in the second half, like if Burnley try to come for a goal, at that point you can just make the substitution. So I would probably go for a really adventurous midfield of Rodri, Foden, and then I'd have Bob here. So I'd have Foden slightly deeper, technically off ball. But I'm not going to predict that. I don't think I'm going to predict that, to be honest with you. I think I'm going to predict that. So if I'm saying that one of Foden's best traits for this match is going to be outside of the box threat, I'm going to predict that, even though if I would prefer Foden off the left, I'm just going to predict Foden to play right of centre. I'm going to actually predict Savio to start. Now that might seem counterintuitive, because Bob is more tailor-made for a match like this. He's far more comfortable in those tight pockets. Savio, on the other hand, is much more of a long space specialist. That's what Pep Guardiola has described those sorts of players as. Savio much better in transition, that sort of thing. He's still more than capable of beating his man. The reason why I'm going to predict him to start, however, over Bob, is because Savio's only started one game this season against Huddersfield, the most recent game, and I feel like Pep's probably going to be thinking, I need to give him a little bit of a run, even if it's just these 2 games back to back, just to replenish that match sharpness and fitness as well. So I am going to predict Savio to start, and I suppose that will be off the right. He's a far better 1v1 dribbler off the right compared to the left. Although that being said, off the left, he's also very good at beating his man and then crossing it to the far post for Haaland. But I don't know if that skill set's going to be as valuable for this game. I think his skill set off the right is probably makes a little bit more sense. So how is this going to work on ball for City? Because off ball, we're hardly going to see City's off ball shape. We might have like 80% of the ball, that sort of thing. So what I'm after is outnumbering the opponents. I want 6 bodies forwards here. I'm going to predict, this looks weird, I'm going to predict something like this. Technically, I suppose this is like a 2-2-6. We have played this before, I promise. I can't recall the last time we played it, but I know we definitely played it against Newcastle last season. Now, it didn't work. We drew the game, but the players on the pitch at that moment in time weren't really fit for purpose. Like, I think we started with a midfield 3 of Gundogan, Kovacic and Rico Lewis, for example. Very, very different dynamics here. So this, I guess, is what I'm going to predict, I suppose. Oh, I've changed my mind, you know. I've changed my mind. If I was starting Bob, then I would play Núñez, because he would be a player who would push on and allow Bob to come in centrally. However, I'm realising this now, because I've predicted Savio to start, I think that it makes a lot more sense to give Savio, who's far more of like a touchline winger than Bob, I think it makes far more sense to have Savio off the right. That then introduces a problem, because we don't really want Núñez to be operating that centrally. Going back to what I said earlier, Rico Lewis is a really good small space player. Oh, yes. Yes. Actually, I much prefer that. My logic was I want Núñez to start at right back so he can push up to right wing. But I've realised that if I'm playing a player in Savio who can play right wing himself, then that's what I'm going to do. That allows you to have another pocket player on the pitch. So look here. So you've got Lewis and Foden, who we know are those sorts of players. Doku is evolving into that player as well. O'Reilly doesn't have to be holding the width out here. He can be like rotating with Doku. There's no problem with that. Savio will stay there, and obviously Haaland is Haaland. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players to outnumber Burnley's back 5. You can have a talk about rest, defence if you want. Is this 2-2 going to be solid enough? I'm not disrespecting Burnley. They will come here to defend, and if we are able to pin them back, then they're not really going to have much license to counter-attack, are they? So that is my starting 11 prediction for City. Not necessarily what I want to have happen, because I might want to go one step further and play Oscar Bob instead. But this is what I'm going to predict City to do, certainly in terms of lineup. Maybe it won't be this extreme, but I do think you have to have a front 6 to deal with Burnley's back 5. This is why formations are useful. I like them as a template, but they aren't the be-all and end-all. My score prediction, I'm going to be confident. I'm going to be hopeful that City get a goal early on and then the floodgates open. I'm going to say 4-0 to City. Another clean sheet for Donnarumma, because I don't think Burnley are going to be that threatening outside of set pieces. But let me know your score prediction in the comments section. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with some of the selections I've made today. Remember, this isn't what I necessarily want to happen. My aim is to try to predict what Pep Guardiola would do instead. Do bear that in mind. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to leave a like on the video because it's free and it helps support your boy. We are on the road to 33.3 thousand recurring subscribers, a third of the way to my ultimate target. So thank you so much for all your continued support. Thank you in particular to my beautiful highest tier members, Tony, Spartacus, Silver Splits to Blue, Austin King, Ethan Larios, and Rowan.